to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this continuing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to the first day of July, today's edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We have passed the halfway point in the year 2015. We are now on the downslope at the beginning of the second half. Today is July 1st, 2015, and it is a pleasure to be with you on this, our third consecutive day of broadcasting here at the Virtual Center. We have our full complement of time today, our full 2 hours. I look forward to it. I look forward to sharing additional ideas and concepts with you. Mostly, I look forward to your reaction to some of the things we've said. We have a phone number, as you know. I would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your ideas, your concerns, or whatever. Our phone number is area code 304-663-4676. 304-663-4676. My email address, if you'd like to communicate directly with me on these issues, one-on-one, my email address is waobrien906 at gmail.com. waobrien, O-B-R-I-E-N, 906, all one word, lowercase, no punctuation, at gmail.com. Again, this is our third consecutive day of programming, but I do have an announcement about next week. We will not be doing live programming next week. I just found out that Bob Kincaid is going to be working out of Washington, D.C. next week, and so he will be moving his program for broadcast in the evenings on the Head On Radio Network from the nation's capital. And since he's not there to produce our programs, we really can't be on. I can't produce my own. So what that means is we'll be focusing on repeat programs during our time together next week. And our next live program will be a week from next Monday. So it's an important announcement. I'll try to remember to make it again at the beginning of our second hour, right after we take our top of the hour break. But I think it's very, very important that you realize if you forget and you come on next week and for some reason you realize that something is wrong, our production facilities have moved out of the studios into the nation's capital for a week. So what that means is we really won't have the capabilities to produce our program. So again, after today, we will not be doing a live program again until a week from next Monday. So that'll be 12 days between today's program and our next one. And the plans are to begin to look at the most recent Supreme Court decisions, especially focused on the issues of the Affordable Care Act and the same-sex marriage decision reached last Friday. By the time we get to them live, there'll be history because they'll be a couple of weeks out. And again, that can be a good thing. It creates a sense of perspective because I really believe, as I've been trying to keep up with some of the prominent newspapers and journals, the reaction to especially the same-sex decision is still quite volatile. The dust really hasn't settled yet in terms of what this might mean, the potential for what this means. I think we're seeing a lot of different opinions and ideas floating around. Of course, the one thing that keeps the news consistent and connects one day to the next is that it seems like almost every day there's a new candidate announcing for the nomination for the Republican candidacy as president. Yesterday, of course, was Governor Christie of New Jersey. So now we have 14 announced candidates in the Republican camp, And I saw an editorial in I believe in the Washington Post today, which indicated that there's quite a bit of sentiment the last 48 hours or so about the possibility that Vice President Biden might be thinking again of entering the race on the Democratic side. You'll recall that there was quite a bit of speculation earlier this spring about Joe Biden running for the Democratic nomination. And for a long time, it was contingent, it seemed, on whether Hillary Clinton would announce. And the thinking was that Joe Biden will definitely run if Hillary doesn't. Well, of course, Hillary did announce, and so that seemed to put the Biden for president movement on hold. And of course, then you know that a couple of weeks ago, Vice President Biden suffered the loss of his son Beau, and we all witnessed that and witnessed the president's eulogy. Seems like almost every week the president is delivering a eulogy somewhere for somebody, but he delivered quite a moving eulogy for Vice President Biden. And the thinking is now that has had a couple of weeks to think in, there seems to be a sense that Vice President Biden is really looking to fully engage his time, and that more and more a run for the nomination seems to be on his mind. And so that would really be interesting. And of course, we already have former Governor O'Malley of Maryland in the Democratic race, as well as Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, and of course Hillary. And so Joe Biden would be the fourth in the Democratic camp. So the interest in running for president seems to be quite prominent, and that seems not to ebb. It seems like every couple of days there's a new candidate in the race. As we know, a number of the candidates that are in there probably don't have much of a chance to secure the nomination. So, I've spent a little bit of time, I'm sure all of you have as well, wondering why some of these people even bother to announce. Well, the fact of the matter is, there's a lot to be gained by being an announced candidate. First of all, with the number of debates already scheduled, just being a participant in these debates and getting the prominence of being an announced presidential candidate has benefits. There are many people, for example, who believe that the former Governor O'Malley probably doesn't stand much chance against Hillary Clinton. In fact, right now, he seems to be running quite far behind Bernie Sanders. But the fact of the matter is, because he's a candidate this time, his potential candidacy 4 years from now would be taken much more seriously and would receive much more credibility. So there clearly are advantages to being an announced candidate for president. And we know, in terms of visibility, getting on the news on a regular basis, just look at at Donald Trump's situation over the last 4 or 5 days, especially after his announcement speech, in which he made some pretty extreme remarks about Mexican immigrants to the United States. And one would think that he would be backtracking and trying to qualify those remarks, when in fact Donald Trump being Donald Trump, it appears that he's being much more assertive and digging his heels in and defending what he said and the way he said it. And he's losing sponsors. NBC took him off the air. I saw this morning a headline in the Washington Post, which indicated that Macy's was dropping interest in candidate Donald Trump, and a number of prominent companies, Univision being the one. Of course, Donald Trump is threatening to sue Univision for dropping the Miss America pageant, the other pageant that Mrs. America pageant, I believe, that Donald Trump controls. And they have forbidden any of their employees to stay or schedule anything at any of the properties or hotels that Donald Trump owns. So his name is in the paper. He's becoming very prominent, and so there are definite things to be gained. But I don't know that Vice President Biden has anything to gain, because I think obviously if he were to run this time, this would obviously be it for him, as I believe it is for Bernie Sanders as well. So I think in their particular situations, I don't think that this is a trial run or a trial balloon or anything else. I think this is the go for broke campaign for both of them. But I think in the person of somebody like O'Malley or Marco Rubio or any of these others, as much as anything else, I think announcing this time, while it may not look good for them in terms of their chances to be successful, it really does plant their flag. It establishes their credibility as candidates and gives them visibility and all the rest of it. And there's something to be said for that, because you don't have to pay for it. And I think that's very significant as well. Anyway, again, I remind you, our phone number, area code 304-663-4676. My email address, waobrien906@gmail.com. And finally, the announcement that we made a few moments ago, and let me repeat, we will not be doing live broadcast of the Virtual Center next week. Bob Kincaid will be moving his operation from the studios of the Hit On Radio Network to Washington, D.C., and I'm assuming that Bob will be broadcasting his program next week from the nation's capital. But he will not be here to produce this program. So consequently, he asked me before we went on the air to make the announcement that we would not be doing live programming at the Virtual Center next week. So it'll in effect it'll give you all a chance maybe to catch up if you've fallen behind on some of the programs, or it'll give you a rest from listening to me, and obviously it'll give me a few days to kind of catch my breath and get on top of back into some research. But anyway, I appreciate your willingness to tune in on this our third day of broadcasting this week. I welcome you. I look forward to hearing from you, and I thank you. I thank you for your willingness to give us so much of your valuable time, if you indeed have become a regular listener at the Virtual Center, and I hope you have. I might say on a personal note that I've been struggling. I'm working on I'm trying to get a Facebook component to the Virtual Center. And so for the last 3 or 4 days, I've been playing around with the idea of a Facebook page. I have a good friend who is working on a page for me. And of course, it needs to be a page that I can regularly post, because I have a lot of things to post, articles, points of view. In other words, it would serve almost as a blog, which I could go to regularly and post issues, events, pieces of information that I think would be not only relevant to the broadcasts themselves, but relevant to the issues that the broadcast hopes to focus attention in on. And a lot of this has been, for me, given where I am. I had a little conversation with Bob Kincaid before we went on the air, and I made the comment that sometimes I think the computer has a way, without coming out and saying it, the computer has a way of letting you know that you're a little bit late when it comes to mastering the technology associated with posting photographs and those kinds of things. Because things that take those who know 5 minutes take me 5 hours. And I get extremely frustrated, because I know that I ought to be able to handle this, but I seem to have difficulty, and it frustrates me. And of course, when I get frustrated, I can't even think of the things I do know. So, I've pretty well concluded that this is the computer's way of telling me, hey, you should have done this 10 years ago. But I didn't, so what can I do? Anyway, welcome to today's program. I appreciate you being with us. And as we indicated yesterday, I'd like to get back into and hopefully complete today our coverage, our attention to the Pope's recent encyclical, which was formally released 2 weeks. It'll be 2 weeks tomorrow, Thursday. That the encyclical Laudato Si was formally released by the Vatican. And of course, as we know, it was released 3 days earlier than that to the press in Italy. It was basically released to the press before the Vatican was ready to release it. And we've already made reference to the fact that there is a sense that those responsible for releasing it ahead of time did so with the idea that they could blunt or soften the impact of many of the things that the Pope was going to say. When I saw this, I kind of told myself, I wonder if the Vatican will decide not to formally release the encyclical, or whether in fact the Pope will go back and perhaps make it even stronger, since his cover, so to speak, had already been blown. But it appears that the Pope's encyclical is getting the traction and the kind of attention that I think the Pope intended for it to get. Clearly, it's getting much more attention worldwide than did the first encyclical, Evangelii Gaudium, which was released last year. We talked a little bit about that and about the politics of these kinds of things. Yesterday, we began to get into the substance of the encyclical, and that's what I'd like to really devote today's program to, is the substance. And as I mentioned, I've selected 5 or 6 what I think are major themes that are clearly discussed and addressed within the encyclical. And I thought that it would be beneficial for all of us here at the Virtual Center if we knew what they were and if we spent some time speculating a little bit on their significance. Yesterday, for example, we began the substantive attention to the encyclical by first looking once again at a couple of quotes on the issue of environment that the Pope cites from previous popes, from John Paul II, as well as from Patriarch Bartholomew of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And then yesterday we also looked at a passage from Francis of Assisi, and we talked about the political perspective associated with the Pope's attention to these previous popes and to these other leaders of the spiritual world, like the Patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And how all of this, at least in the mind of an op-ed piece that appeared in Monday's New York Times, all of this seems to reflect the Pope's sophisticated political insight from the first time around with the earlier encyclical. It's clear that the Pope has organized and structured this particular encyclical in order that it would be shielded and largely protected from a lot of the criticism that was leveled against his first encyclical. So we talked about that. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to begin today's program by going back a little bit and looking at some of the things that the Pope says about the issue of work and the idea of human dignity that is so closely associated with the concept of work. The implication being that technology, the technological revolution and the automation that is associated with it is displacing so many people, not only from their current jobs, but it's really rendering them unable to access the system once again. Once they are out, they do not seem to be able to acquire the skills necessary to get back in, because the skill demands of this increasingly technological society associated with the internet and the communications revolution associated with it is rendering more and more of the world's population useless. We talked about that when we covered Richard Sennett. And Richard Sennett's belief, his concern, that the idea of uselessness was almost intrinsic. It was built in, it was embedded in his view of the new capitalism. It was rendering more and more people as being outside the productive economy in a dynamic, growing, increasingly more sophisticated economy. It was demanding more, and consequently by clear implication, as the skill demands increased, the people able to meet those demands obviously decreased. The higher you raise the bar, the fewer people there will be who can make it. And I think that's what we're into. Obviously, this is a major concern in the Pope's encyclical, is the rendering of so many of the world's population, so many human beings in this economic environment as being rather useless, unable to access the economy. We looked at this a little bit yesterday by looking at one paragraph early on in the encyclical that the Pope included in the whole issue of work, the dignity of work. It was the first paragraph in the section of chapter 2 entitled The Gaze of Jesus. And very quickly, we'll look at this again because we looked at this particular passage yesterday. Jesus lived in full harmony with creation, and others were amazed. And remember, this is the Pope talking. What sort of man is this, that even the winds and the seas obey him? Taken from Matthew. His appearance was not that of an ascetic set apart from the world, nor of an enemy to the pleasant things of life. Of himself he said, quote, "The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, look, a glutton and a drunkard." He was far removed from philosophies which despise the body, matter, and the things of the world. Such unhealthy dualisms, nonetheless, left a mark on certain Christian thinkers in the course of history and disfigured the gospel. Jesus worked with his hands in daily contact with the matter created by God, to which he gave form by his craftsmanship. It is striking that most of his life was dedicated to this task in a simple life which awakened no admiration at all. Quote, "Is this not the carpenter, the son of Mary?" This is from the Gospel of Mark. In this way, Jesus sanctified human labor and endowed it with a special significance for our development. As St. John Paul II taught, quote, "By enduring the toil of work in union with Christ crucified for us, man in a way collaborates with the Son of God for the redemption of humanity." There's absolutely no question then that last quotation from John Paul II about how man working is a psychic collaboration with the Son of God who had taken on the role of human being. And there's a connection, a linkage there that John Paul II makes clear in his citation that you can't ignore. In other words, as you look at the life of Jesus, at the life of Christ, it clearly reflects the dignity of work. And man working is considered to be at least in the eyes of the church, a manifestation of that challenge, that role for man, which is to achieve dignity through work. Obviously, the message is, if the work isn't there, and man can't fulfill his quest for dignity by working, how else is man expected to secure that kind of dignity? I think that's the message that the Pope is sending us. There's one more section of the encyclical several pages later. It's about halfway into the encyclical, where the Pope really delves in some depth into the issue of work, of jobs, the need for employment, the need to keep mankind working. In these numbered paragraphs of the encyclical, what I'm looking at here are paragraphs 124, 125, 126, and 7. I'm not going to do all of those, but I just wanted to point out where in the encyclical, if you go online, you can find these. The Pope addressing the issue of work. I would recommend that you begin with paragraph 124, which is about halfway into the encyclical. I believe there are about 245 or 250 paragraphs total in the entire encyclical of 184 pages. And so paragraph 124 is a little bit more than halfway into the encyclical. So let's listen to what the Pope says about the issue of work, and then we can kind of reflect upon it when we finish. Any approach to an integral ecology, the Pope says, which by definition does not exclude human beings, needs to take account of the value of labor. As St. John Paul II wisely noted in his encyclical, Laborem Exercens, according to the biblical account of creation, God placed man and woman in the garden he had created, not only to preserve it, but also to make it fruitful. Laborers and craftsmen thus, quote, maintain the fabric of the world, unquote. Developing the created world in a prudent way is the best way of caring for it, as this means that we ourselves become the instrument used by God to bring out the potential which he himself inscribed in things. Quote, the Lord created medicines out of the earth, and a sensible man will not despise them, unquote. The Pope is making a clear point here. In paragraph 124, that man working is critical to the development or the realization of the full potential of God's creation. Not only of the man, but of the planet that God gave to man, and the responsibility that God gave to man to care for and grow his creation. In other words, reaching the full potential of God's creation requires that man work and contribute to its growth and development. The Pope goes on, if we reflect on the proper relationship between human beings and the world around us, notice the emphasis on the proper relationship between man and the environment, between human beings and the world around us. We see the need for a correct understanding of work. If we talk about the relationship between human beings and things, the question arises as to the meaning and purpose of all human activity. This has to do not only with manual or agricultural labor, but with any activity involving a modification of existing reality, from producing a social report to the design of a technological development. Underlying every form of work is a concept of the relationship which we can and must have with what is other than ourselves. Together with the awe-filled contemplation of creation, which we find in St. Francis of Assisi, the Christian spiritual tradition has also developed a rich and balanced understanding of the meaning of work, as, for example, in the life of Blessed Charles de Foucauld and his followers. Paragraph 127. We are convinced, quote, that man is the source, the focus, and the aim of all economic and social life, unquote. Nonetheless, once our human capacity for contemplation and reverence is impaired, it becomes easy for the meaning of work to be misunderstood. We need to remember that men and women, quote, have the capacity to improve their lot, to further their moral growth, and to develop their spiritual endowments, unquote. Work should be the setting for this rich personal growth, where many aspects of life enter into play. Creativity, planning for the future, developing our talents, living out our values, relating to others, giving glory to God. It follows that in the reality of today's global society, it is essential that we continue to prioritize the goal of access to steady employment for everyone, no matter the limited interests of business and the dubious economic reasoning. We are created with a vocation to work. The very word vocation in the Christian tradition reverts back to the idea of calling, if you remember in Scripture. The belief that God calls each person, each man, to the particular work that his creation requires. The tradition going way back into Christianity and before, in Judaism itself, is the idea that what man does in his day-to-day life is not necessarily the product of free choice. That in effect, man is called to perform certain functions. Man is born with certain skills, certain talents, certain opportunities to develop and hone skills and craftsmanship in order to better contribute to God's creation and to the people who live on this planet. That's really what religion, Christianity, teaches us. Man's role in this life and his contribution to the quality of life for everyone around him is all about. All of it presumes the availability of work. And all of it is based on the fact that it is people working that constitutes people growing, people developing, people reaching their full potential. Reaching their full potential doesn't mean only profit for them. Reaching their full potential means their responsibility to develop their skills as much as possible in order to make the meaningful contribution to the quality of life of others that God intended. Let me pause there for 1 second and ask you to think about this. several months ago, when we were looking at Gary Wills, and Gary Wills' book on the creation of the Declaration of Independence, the book entitled Inventing America, we spent quite a bit of time looking at the writings of those associated with what Wills and others refer to as the Scottish Enlightenment. And we made the distinction, we emphasized the distinction that Gary Wills makes between the Enlightenment as we have traditionally known it and the Enlightenment as it was being developed and formulated among Scottish philosophers. Adam Smith, David Hume, Francis Hutchinson, among them. We looked at their writings. Mainly what we were looking for is the degree to which their writings influenced the founders. More specifically, in terms of the Declaration of Independence, influenced Thomas Jefferson. To what extent we were investigating. To what extent was Thomas Jefferson's language, wording in the Declaration of Independence a product of the Scottish Enlightenment, as well as, or even more than, a product of the traditional Enlightenment as we've looked at it on the continent in France. The continental, or the French Enlightenment, so to speak, focused on the writings of Hobbes and Locke, the philosophers who focused on the issue of natural rights and the idea of the sanctity of private property as potentially being a natural right. That's the approach that most of us learned about the Enlightenment and learned about the origins of the Declaration of Independence by studying Locke, by looking carefully at Locke's state of nature, by looking at the rationale that Locke uses to justify the idea of limited government as opposed to absolute government, which is the government, of course, advocated by Thomas Hobbes. And so much of what our contemporary thinkers wanted us and to believe, wanted young people to believe about the origins of the Declaration of Independence, that objective required that Jefferson's declaration be linked directly to Locke. And Locke's emphasis on liberty, and Locke's emphasis on the sanctity of private property, and the linkage that these had to the concept of natural rights. But when we began to look at the writings of Hume and Francis Hutchinson and Adam Smith, we began to see a philosophy associated with a different kind of enlightenment. An enlightenment which challenged this idea of property being the priority of human rights. The Scottish Enlightenment tended to emphasize the social or civic responsibilities associated with natural rights. The reason that God infused mankind with natural rights and liberties, the Scottish philosophers argued, was because of the moral question. The idea that as your rights developed, that enhanced your ability to serve others and to give back to the community at large. What I'm suggesting is that there's a clear connection here between the Scottish Enlightenment thinkers of the late 17th and early 18th centuries and the philosophy of work and the development of human dignity being developed by the Pope in this particular encyclical. What the Pope is giving us here is the Church's view on man's development, man's freedom, man's talent, man's calling, man's need to work, man's responsibility to God and the rest of mankind to develop his talents and develop his abilities to their maximum, not so much to maximize profit to themselves, but to maximize their ability to contribute to the public interest, to the common good. There's absolutely no question then that the Pope's encyclical links up much more directly with the ideas of the Scottish Enlightenment than it does with the Continental Enlightenment, which emphasizes the idea of private property, limited government, and self-interest. In a sense, then, what we are looking at is the reality of today's contemporary debate between liberalism and conservatism, between the right and the left, between those whose agenda is best served by taking our founding documents back and linking them to one particular philosophy, which is Locke and the natural rights philosophy, or whether in fact it is better served by looking at the Scottish philosophers and looking at their efforts to try to define what man's natural rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were really all about. In this context, I make mention of a piece of advice that I received during our history grants several years ago from John Kaminsky, who is the longtime editor of the Ratification Project at the University of Wisconsin. John was a presenter in these history grants. And John, I can remember telling our teachers, if you want a real education, go back to the documents on the founding. Look at the documents of ratification that are built into and contained in the Rotunda Project. Look at the writings of Madison and Jefferson and Hamilton and the rest of them. Specifically, look up how they focused, how they used the word happiness. What is the difference, John asked the teachers, between the way we look at the word happiness today and the way those in the 18th century looked at happiness? Happiness was not measured by how you felt. Happiness was defined more by how much goodwill and goodness you could bring to others. Your happiness was measured not by your status, not by your wealth, not by the amount of property that you owned. Happiness was to be defined by what you could do for others. Very, very close to the golden rule laid out so clearly in Scripture in the Gospel of Matthew. Laid out so clearly in the year 2015 by Pope Francis I in this encyclical. I think the Pope is making that connection in what he says about the dignity and the idea or the vocation of work. And in paragraph 128, the Pope really lays out in spades the way the church looks at work in today's world. We are created with a vocation to work, the Pope says. The goal should not be that technological progress increasingly replace human work, for this would be detrimental to humanity. Work is a necessity, part of the meaning of life on this earth, a path to growth, human development, and personal fulfillment. Helping the poor financially must always be a provisional solution in the face of pressing need. The broader objective should always be to allow them a dignified life through work. Yet the orientation of the economy has favored a kind of technological process in which the costs of production are reduced by laying off workers and replacing them with machines. This is yet another way in which we end up working against ourselves. The loss of jobs also has a negative impact on the economy through the progressive erosion of social capital. The network of relationships of trust, dependability, and respect for rules, all of which are indispensable for any form of civil coexistence. In other words, human costs always include economic costs, and economic dysfunctions always involve human costs. To stop investing in people in order to gain greater short-term financial gain is bad business for society, unquote, says the Pope in paragraph number 28 of this encyclical. There is no way that the Pope could make the point any clearer than he has in that paragraph as to the dysfunction and the contradictions between what our economic priorities dictate and what our moral responsibility demands from us. We are working against our own best interests. In order to continue providing employment, the Pope says, it is imperative to promote an economy which favors productive diversity and business creativity. To ensure economic freedom from which all can effectively benefit, restraints occasionally have to be imposed on those possessing greater resources and financial power. Let me repeat this. To ensure economic freedom from which all can effectively benefit, the public interest, restraints occasionally have to be imposed on those possessing greater resources and financial power. To claim economic freedom, while real conditions bar many people from actual access to it, and while possibilities for employment continue to shrink, is to practice doublespeak, which brings politics into disrepute. Business is a noble vocation, directed to producing wealth and improving our world. It can be a fruitful source for prosperity for the areas in which it operates, especially if it sees the creation of jobs as an essential part of its service to the common good. The principal responsibility of business, of corporations, is not profit. It is the creation of work for the people who have to have it. And when profit demands that you lay off employees in the interest of the bottom line, that is 180 degrees contrary, the exact opposite of what this philosophy suggests that business must be doing if it is to contribute to the common good. No wonder those whose priority is dictated by the economic realities of the 21st century have tried to find ways to dismiss and or repudiate the Pope's encyclical. This is a philosophy which these folks don't want people in the world to reflect upon and to know about. I would suggest historically the Scottish Enlightenment and this contributing to the benefit of the common good priority, which seems to underwrite or underscore the philosophies of the Scottish philosophers during the Enlightenment, is an approach that many people do not want our students to even know about. It's really interesting because the educational strategy that many bring to the table is the philosophy of doubt that we saw taking shape during the tobacco wars in the 1970s here in the United States. The way that corporate America chose to respond to scientific evidence that tobacco was unhealthy was not to come up with research to counter that. Brown and Williamson, in its memo, admitted that that's not even possible. What you have to do then is call the credibility of the scientists who are producing the research into question. You have to find ways to label the science that they are bringing to the fore junk science. And you have to get people doubtful enough about what's true and what's not true to accept the alternative as a legitimate possibility. The only way that you can win this war against hard science is to create controversy, is to create a debate in which both sides are considered to be legitimate and the side with the best argument wins. That's been the strategy. That's the essence of what we've called the war against truth. And that's really what those who would rewrite our past and put words into the mouths of the founders that weren't even there, that's the strategy that they have chosen to adopt in order to sell one particular approach to the Enlightenment, one particular approach to history, one specific school of thought as to the origins of our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States. The way you do it is to set it up where people only are exposed to one part of the argument, which ironically contradicts their approach in today's world of trying to challenge hard science and challenge the truth. I think this is incredibly important philosophical information and insight. We have got to open up our education system to the point that we are willing to introduce these alternative interpretations to students, and then encourage students to go back and look at the sources and make their own judgments, reach their own judgments as to what seems to make the most sense, rather than people with a political agenda telling them what political sense is, or common sense is. Again, it seems to me very, very understandable as to why so many people are uncomfortable with this particular encyclical of Pope Francis. Pope Francis is introducing in insights a philosophy which many of our people have never been exposed to before. It's usually been categorized under the heading of socialism or communism or un-Americanism and all of these other isms, and therefore considered to be censored, off track, out of bounds, not worth looking at. The result of that, I would suggest to you, is not education. It's in fact the exact opposite of education. It is mind control. It is cherry-picking the past in order to justify a particular philosophy and way of explaining the present. If you want to call it unethical, you can do that. If you want to focus on what it does to humankind and to the dignity of people, you can raise the issue of morality. The fact that this particular approach can be viewed as immoral. The point is, given what we are doing to the planet and what the Pope has demonstrated with his own scientific ability that is being done to the planet, it seems to me that it's time to blow the dust off these approaches and these philosophies that have been buried for too long, and get them on the table and get them discussed as they should have been all along. That is the Pope's position on work. So all of this argument, all of this approach that we used in previous weeks about the dignity of work and trying to find ways to restore the dignity of work, if we are going to do what is consistent with the philosophy and the priorities of this encyclical, then we have got to find ways to fuse what seems to be our best interest economically with what are our best interests morally and spiritually. There are a lot of people that do not want that particular case to ever see the light of day. And I think that's what we are talking about. We have reached the top of our first hour. It's 59 minutes after the hour. And it seems to me to be a good time to take our break and then to come back and look at other aspects of the Pope's encyclical, many of which, it seemed to me, reinforce and elaborate on some of the issues we've already raised. Yesterday, we looked at the issue of transcendentalism, of the extent to which the Pope's explanation of God's creation in Scripture is so similar to the transcendental philosophy articulated by Ralph Waldo Emerson in his address, The American Scholar, delivered at Harvard in 1837. What I would like to do in our second hour is return to the issue of what the Pope calls the technocratic paradigm and the idea of integral ecology, the interrelationship that exists, rather than the separation that we seem to have become so comfortable with in our modern way of looking at these issues. You are listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. We will pause for a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back with our second hour here at the Virtual Center. Please stay tuned. We'll have a short break. We'll be right back. Thank you, Bob Kincaid. Thank you for the music, the selection of wonderful music. Great horn.
Felt like I was sitting in a smoky strip joint in New Orleans or something.
Couldn't you taste the bourbon?
Indeed.
Bob, thank you.
My pleasure.
And if we don't get a chance to talk again, please be safe next week. I know you'll be headed to D.C. So
it's gonna be a week of. When we go up there, people don't really. It's hard work.
Yeah.
I mean, it is grinding business, and so we're gonna be trying to make the most of our time up there. Get folks back on the bill in the House who were there before, and really making a concerted effort to get the Senate to introduce a companion bill, because among other things, I don't know if I've mentioned this to you, thanks to the fine folks over at Credo Mobile, the mobile telephone company, they put out a petition. We've got nearly 200,000 signatures of American citizens demanding that the AIC Act be introduced and passed. That's pretty stunning.
So I guess if I were to make a statement about next week, you're going to be spending a lot of time with people that you'd rather not be with.
Well, you don't get to really hang out with the people you don't like. You wind up talking to staffers.
I understand.
The entire federal government runs on underpaid 23-year-old kids just out of college.
Yeah.
And by the way,
the dignity of work, huh, Bob?
Well, there you go. Exactly. Yeah. By the way, you've got. I am told here. Hold on. I'm having one of those clairvoyant moments. You're going to be getting a call here in a matter of moments. There it is.
Okay.
In point of fact, Horst is on the line from Taiwan.
Oh my! Isn't this a great way to conclude to spend our final hour of the week? Thank you, Bob.
No trouble. I will leave you to it.
Okay, Bob, and feel free to join us if you choose.
Absolutely.
Horst, welcome. Welcome to the Virtual Center. How are you?
All right. You hear me okay?
I can hear you great. Wonderful.
Terrific.
Sounds like you're right in the next room.
Well, in the next room 14,000 miles away, I guess that's kind of true. Yeah. Well, it's one of those things. I guess the last time we talked was maybe 3 weeks ago. Is that right?
Yeah, perhaps 3, maybe.
Yeah. Well, we got
like
that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I worked the next 14 days straight without a break, so I was not able to. You remember I mentioned being let out of my cage at that time.
Yes, exactly.
I'm not exactly completely joking about that,
but apparently you went back into it for a while.
Yeah. I'm altering my schedule now, so hopefully I'll have some more. I'm going to have more days off during the week now. And
oh, great! That
was like a push on that. Yeah. It's I was trying to accomplish something, but the work actually kind of got to be too much and is getting in the way of what I was hoping to do. So anyway, whatever. But at the same time, I've been able to keep up very, very nicely with all the conversation since then. So
yes.
As always, I got a million things on my mind, and I'm sure only maybe 3 of them will get out. And
that's okay.
Kind of. In the past, I've tried to kind of take notes and try to be sure to remember to bring up this point and that point. It just never works out. So I thought I'd just call in and just wing it for a change. And
okay, that's great.
Just see how it goes.
Hey, that's sometimes that's the best way.
Well, you never know. But we always seem to come out okay. So I hope this time it'll not be any different that way. and I just have to say, if nothing else, I mean, and I know you must feel the same way because you devoted so much time in the last week or two on this encyclical, and not just this one, but also like kind of the previous record that this Pope has established in seriously, a very short time.
Right.
I kind of feel like, considering like his record of how many things he's done, all the monumental changes he's introduced, it feels like he's been around for like 5 or 6 years. And the fact is, it's only been like, has it even been 2 years yet? I don't even remember anymore.
No, it's not 2 years, and he's really stirring up the water.
Yeah.
He really is. I mean, he's stirred up the sentiment from the bottom, and it's all floating around now. And in less than 2 years, it's a little bit unbelievable that he's been able to do that. And he's getting so much support from many people who had turned their backs on the church itself, and are rethinking it now because of him. And
when you think about like what a monolithic organization the Catholic Church traditionally has been,
yes,
and, we talk about how when a new presidential administration takes charge, and when President Obama gets in, and we talk about how the ship of state doesn't turn on a dime. In a weird kind of way, what's happened in the Catholic Church just since this Pope has taken charge is really kind of putting the light of that in a lot of sense, hasn't it? I mean,
yeah, it really does.
It's funny for as many things that Barack Obama has not been able to accomplish as a president, in the face of Republican opposition. This Pope just seems like he's got no problem at all. He just gets onto it.
Right.
Every time you think someone's going to stop him, it doesn't happen. He just keeps going. He doubles down and he. You wonder as we move into what he calls, what he talks about all the time as the global economy and the interaction of the intercommunication and dependency in the world. It almost seems like that he's basically telling us in his own way that something like the universality of the Catholic Church is the only place from which we can address these issues. The nation state has become pretty much has been left behind, if you will, by international corporations that are free of national state or government control, and that ultimately, only an organization which is as big and as widespread as they are can speak to these problems, and that seems to be what's driving him, and he may be right. Yeah, in a way, it reminds me a little bit of your discussion also of where organized labor needs to go.
Yes.
We've got to transcend whatever our old paradigms are as far as how we organize and get things done. And it's I have kind of a joke that I think Bob has heard 2 or 3 times, but it's not. It's one of those jokes that's not really a joke. It's that I really wish this Pope was a fair bit younger than he is, because I would love for him to be like a 20-year Pope, like someone who has a long time to really to get some things set in stone.
Yeah.
Or just this is a pretty old-looking guy. I don't know how many years he's got left in him, and I'm afraid that he can make all these sweeping changes, and then the next guy that comes in can just roll the whole thing back like it never happened.
Yeah. We have another Benedict, and that's the old 1 step forward, 2 steps back idea.
But the thing is, what's occurred to me in the last couple of days is something that Francis has accomplished here is he has made the church relevant. I mean, in a way that it has not been since maybe even I don't want to get hyperbolic, but possibly back to the Protestant Reformation. I mean, in my entire lifetime, I've never been a Catholic anyway, and I didn't even really understand what that meant until I was probably in my 20s. But I have never ever considered for a moment looking to the church, any church, but particularly the Catholic Church, for guidance or for leadership or for showing the way to the future on any subject whatsoever. And suddenly, this guy's right out in the front. He's in front of he's like I said, he's in front of the president in a lot of ways. It's
amazing you would say that, because I think you're exactly right, and I think that's what makes this Pope so exciting to so many people. It seems to me, he's basically establishing credibility for approaches and insights and ideas that the world has pretty much chosen to bury, and he's digging them all up again, and it's kind of exciting.
Well, he's also putting a really, I think, a novel spin on it too. At the same time, these are not all old ideas. These are ideas that, in some form or fashion, have kind of been out there for a while, but they have a new relevance, in the modern era. I mean, we talk about, I don't know, how he applies it to modern capitalism. I mean, like, obviously that's a relatively new thing. So when you couple that with, like, stewardship of the earth and, care for the environment and things like that, it has a new flavor to it. I mean,
it sure does. Yeah.
He's not just recycling old material, is what I mean. Is he's really.
And what he's doing is he's relating environmentalism, the priorities of environmentalism, back to Scripture and back to God's initial plan for creation, and the role that man is supposed to play in it, and how misdirected or misguided many of us have allowed ourselves to become. We've allowed people to direct us in ways that benefited them, and in the process, we've kind of lost our way. Emerson, in the American Scholar, makes the point that things have become so divided and so screwed up that we can't even see the original plan anymore.
Right.
And I think that's what what is allowing us to do is take all of this disparate information and pull it together in ways that are creating revelation for a lot of people. I think. I really do. I really do.
And just to put like a little bow on the point I was making a couple of minutes ago, I'm starting to think, if he keeps this up, even, if the worst happens and he's not with us, in a relatively short amount of time, the church is going to be reluctant to give up. I mean, like I said, he's made them relevant in a way they're not used to having.
No, I understand what you mean.
They're going to have a hard time. They're going to have to think seriously about, like, I don't know what political process exactly. I really don't know anything about the inner workings of it. I don't know how he got there in the first place. It kind of shocks me, But at the same time, like, I'm sure the people who elected him to the position had an idea where his center of gravity was, so to speak.
Right.
So
right. The first non-European pope, the first pope from south of the equator. That's not an accident. They knew very well what they were risking, what they were getting into.
Well, it's not like his political leanings were a secret in the first place. I mean,
no,
really.
No,
I mean, like,
no.
Oh, hey, surprise!
Yeah.
I hang out with poor people and stuff, but no, it wasn't like that at all. So
yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, like, whatever that particular political calculus was that got him there in the first place, like, they have to be noticing how suddenly, the people are paying attention to what the Pope says, in a way that
exactly. Yeah.
In a way they haven't, at least in my lifetime, I think. I mean, I go back a little ways.
Well, one of the things that I've been thinking about is that we've got very strong conservative right-of-center forces in this country that have been able to contain liberalism by putting it in a bottle, so to speak.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, when somebody comes out and begins to talk about the need to create a whole mess of jobs and to pump money into the economy in order to put people back to work again and rebuild our infrastructure, which is crumbling right around us.
Yeah.
Traditionally, those that are opposed to that have been able to pretty much stifle it and keep it in the bottle. But the Pope is bringing it all out and making it legitimate.
Right.
And suggesting that this is probably what we should have been doing all along. And getting people to think in those terms, it seems to me, is huge, is hugely important.
Yeah, and the time couldn't be more right for it, too. I mean, obviously, like, jobs is a subject that's on everyone's minds.
Everybody's. Anyway. Oh, yeah.
I mean, you don't even have to say it. Even the conservatives and the Republicans and, as far out on the right-wing fringes as you want to get, I mean, like, they understand that. They understand to employ the rhetoric, but they don't get into the details like he's really getting into it here. And,
right.
Power to him,
This thing with Greece that's going on is...
Oh, boy.
It's so threatening, but at the same time, it touches on many of these issues. I mean, the spokesman for Greece right now are in effect saying is, we've gone as far as we feel we can go before we start to violate the things we believe in most, and we're not going to go there. We're not going to go there. And they're basically saying to the world, this far but no further, and it's going to be amazing to see. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens, because apparently there are a number of other economies that may not be quite in as bad a shape as Greece's is right now, but are in some trouble as well. So we may be witnessing the first blast, if you will. Yeah. But anyway.
Well, Europe's a mixed bag. I mean, like we tend to think of Germany and Great Britain and France and things like that, but the fact is there's a lot of countries over there, and many of them, Greece has been in bad financial shape ever since I was there, which is probably 20 years ago.
Right.
But depending on what the region is, Spain's got some trouble. Portugal's not up there either, and then you've got your other European countries that people don't even think about, like Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia, Croatia, and all that. I mean, like there's a big region there that we don't pay much attention to. And
Bob Kincaid. I was just going to say, Bob Kincaid raised an issue with me before we went on the air today about Greece and about the West and the West putting Greece in this either or situation that it's in. Bob's feeling is, given the debt that the world owes to Greece, it would seem that we could justify, loosening the screws quite a bit,
But we could, you and I could, and Bob could too. But but these screws are that screwdriver is being held by the big banks and the international corporations and the people that basically created the situation in the first place.
That's right. Yeah.
They're not minded to. History? What's that? Oh?
Yeah, what's that? Wait, that's what we go to when we need it. But anyway, I agree with you on the Pope and the waves, the degree of that this Pope is able to make waves in such a short time it's amazing.
And on other fronts, I was just reminded today because I was listening to another podcast that. I keep up with several different threads going all different directions, and I was listening to an old archive from I got 5 or 6 months ago that I just ran across, and the Pope was in the news there for having been quoted about his position on evolution, the theory of evolution, and natural selection, and I had completely forgotten about this. It wasn't even that long ago. It may have been January or December or something I think it was from like late last year, like 2014. But he dropped a couple of very potentially earth-shattering statements about like, oh well, God is God and everything, but he's not a magician. He didn't just like snap his fingers and make things happen. He needs created organisms that can evolve into a greater unfolding of some kind of whatever. I mean, it would have been heretical for him to say that maybe even 30 years ago.
Yes, exactly.
And I remember I just completely forgot about it because it didn't make that much of a ripple in the news media. I thought it would. I thought, oh boy, we're going to hear about this, and it didn't happen. And maybe something else came up.
Right, it pushed it off. A lot of times, the way that many people have chosen to deal with some of the things he says is to not deal with them at all and hope that they'll go away or that nobody will listen and that people won't be quite sure of what they heard. I've had a similar experience here. I could swear that a local car dealership in our area, I heard an advertisement on the radio about a week ago, but I have not heard it since. And basically what they were saying is if you buy a new car from them and provided you can pass the background check, we will give you as a gift an assault rifle. And I couldn't, I heard it, I thought I heard it, I was absolutely in disbelief, and I haven't heard it since, and I haven't read anything in the paper about it, so I kind of think maybe I was mistaken, but I thought sure that that's what I heard.
I don't know. To be honest with you, that doesn't strike me as all that controversial. I mean, like I've heard like many promotions like that of going you know.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, so. ATVs and everything else, but an assault rifle. Wow.
It may just well be like they ran out of assault rifles like in the first 3 days. The point is like, oh, this is too expensive now because
exactly right.
There's a waiting list on those things, not because of background checks. But because the
only benefit is this is we'll be able to know that chances are the people with assault rifles are driving particular kinds of vehicles.
Yeah, I guess so. Maybe it's like, well, I was going to buy a Chevy, but I got to wait 6 months for my rifle, you know.
Yeah.
Somewhere else.
Yeah. God.
No, I don't know. One thing I did want to get to, well, actually, just on the general subject of the assault on, or the war on science and facts and knowing things, being smart and stuff, it's such a huge can of worms there, and this is one of those things I could probably write a book on just to, if I could just discipline myself to sit down and do it. Yeah. But number one, and I have this book in my collection, but if you were looking into it, I haven't read it myself because I don't have time to read anymore, but I have time to buy things and put them on the shelf.
I know, I did that too.
If you remember Al Gore, back in I think 2003 or 2002, like sometime in the interim between his not getting the presidency in 2000 up and before Bush's re-election, as it were, he wrote and released a book called The Assault on Reason, and I think a lot of that. I mean, like I said, I own the book. It's around here somewhere. When he says I'm going to sit down and look at it, but that might be something worth checking into. You can probably get it at the local library with no problem.
Oh yeah. I had forgotten that he did that. That's right. You know.
Yeah. Well, he came out with a couple of very big. I remember one particular barn burner of a speech that he released. Probably 2002, 2003, something like that. And it was about this. Sometime like in the years or so after that, there was a huge draft war movement that people kind of don't remember now, but like it not too different from like the pressure being put on Elizabeth Warren to run.
Yes.
Like please do it, please. There were commercial spots and all this kind of things. You got to do it. So. Prior to that, he'd released that book. He'd done a couple of major public addresses, and people were still interested in what he was saying. And he was still like kind of a public figure at the time.
So that would fit
into a lot of this material.
So you're basically suggesting that there probably is pretty good information in there to fit into this whole discussion about the attack on hard science and the attack on truth and the creation of doubt.
I think it's worth a look. If I remember right, his take on that was from the perspective of how media and think tanks kind of collaborate to create a message and then get it going, which really is exactly like a perfect fit for what you were saying about like the tobacco advertising campaign. There, it's something very much like that, but with a lot more media collaboration as we have seen.
Yeah, if you can't come up with evidence to counter or refute what hard science is saying, then what are the other alternatives for us? And of course, this idea of doubt and the credibility of those who are producing the science seems to be a logical way to go. And the Harry in Baltimore sent this link to this article that I read. I read the whole thing, and it's about it was in the New Yorker, I believe, in 2012, and it was about the campaign, the corporate campaign, to literally wreck the professional career of a scientist who was teaching science at, I believe, the University of Southern California, Berkeley, and it was amazing. I mean, what they did. I mean, they had a whole unit within the corporate structure that was focused on finding ways to create credibility issues with everything that this guy was finding and every piece he was writing, and it was unbelievable.
Right. Yeah.
So and I'm sure that's probably the direction that Gore is heading into. And of course, as you point out, this is more than a decade ago.
Yeah. He's been there, done that. I don't even know what he's up to these days. He's out there being a billionaire or something. But
I mean, after you run for president and effectively some people say give it away. And after you invent the internet, and I mean, what's left?
you grow a beard, and then after that, there's nothing else.
Yeah.
Apparently, but yeah. So I keep remembering that because we, the way this discussion keeps getting formulated is like, the war on science, the assault on reason. Right. And I thought, oh, wait a minute, wait, that's the exact title of a book that I own.
Yeah, right.
Somehow in 10 plus years I haven't managed to read yet.
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah, it really, and again, that when we think about it, I think probably the thing about this whole discussion that really, has really settled in with me is that it's not so much an attack on science, it's an attack on the way we in this culture have decided that truth can best be approached. That, this is our best shot at knowing at finding out what truth is. And to attack it is to really take on many of the decisions and many of the philosophical foundations of our whole culture.
I think there's a top-down and a bottom-up aspect to that. And I think what you're describing is more of kind of a top-down, like we're going to discover this truth so we can push it out there and promulgate it to, for mass consumption.
Mm-hmm.
To my mind, from the bottom up, and the bottom being like, we're at like 95% of the population probably. The great majority of people, I think there are two or three big strains that to me are heavily influential here, and one of them is just a crisis of confidence in authorities. People simply do not believe what they're told about anything from the people who are supposedly in charge of knowing what these things are, and it's not just science, and it's not just government, and it's not just and you can't. If you look at the blatant abuses of that authority, you can't really blame people for it. I mean, the only thing it just breaks down in different lines of demarcation between like your more sophisticated and perceptive people to the people who are not that sharp or are so overworked and so tired and so out of it, they don't have time to educate them and inform themselves.
Right.
And, and I fall in that category a lot myself. Part of my paradigm for information gathering is I spend time researching like one or two individuals who seem to be pretty good, reliable gatherers of information, and I check them out to the extent that I can to make sure that I think I can trust them, and I kind of hand it over to them because I don't have time to spend my whole day.
Right.
Checking, articles and primary sources and getting up on stuff. I rely on aggregators.
Yeah, I understand. But, that's part and parcel of, that leads into the whole idea that there's no such thing as evidence. That when you begin to distrust the credibility of the people that are supposed to have the answers, they have the credentials and they have the degrees and they have all the letters after their name and all of that. So theoretically, they're the ones that can come closer to describing truth than any of the rest of us. And when you start to disbelieve them, then it seems to me you're wandering into the idea that my ideas or what I believe is as good as what they believe. It's a free country and I have as much right to believe what I believe as they do to articulate or say what they believe.
I think that's a separate phenomenon.
Do you?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Go ahead.
To put it briefly, I would say in the first category, I think it's just a matter of trust. Or even respect. You think of it like a person you know. Once you've ascertained for yourself that person has lied to you about something important, you're never going to trust that person again.
I understand.
Right. And there are two, like in the realms of science, I can think of two very easy examples that come to the top of my head is, for instance, the tobacco industry. Since we've been there, they have tons of scientists working for them. If you've ever seen the movie, that Russell Crowe movie, what was it called? The one.
I'm not sure.
I'll think of it in a second, but it was The Insider. That was where he's got the 2020 segment with Al Pacino or whatever like that. But
right.
he was a big research scientist for Philip Morris or something like that, and all the research that pointed to all the negative effects of tobacco, he was not allowed to discuss or release or anything like that, and he made like his big expose, and that's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the other hand, we also know that pharmaceutical companies get away, in many cases, quite literally with murder. In how they test, promote, distribute, and market their products. I mean, how many examples, like in the last 20 years, Fen-Phen, Digitalis, Vioxx, these things. Yeah. This is the cutting edge. This is science. Now, if you take that. You take these very well-known failures of where the people who were supposed to be responsible and they're supposed to know everything, they're the ones 2 years. Okay, now you and I, we have enough education and background or whatever that we can kind of detect the nuances and subtleties and like, okay, this deserves particular research and get the details and find out what's going on here.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people that can't do that.
Right.
Bob on his show 3 or 4 years ago, he was describing a trip. We call it the Smoothie Whisperer. Bob remembers this well.
Yeah.
They went to McDonald's or was it McDonald's? I don't know, or whatever it was. They had like one of those drink dispenser things that produces smoothies, and for some reason the machine was not functioning correctly. And Bob kind of looked over the employee's shoulder and said, there's a schematic that shows like 3 pictures or something, like picture 1 shows the machine with the lid off, picture 2 shows put it on this way, picture 3 shows twist it this way, and Bob says, I think you're supposed to twist it or something like that to make it work.
Yeah.
And the people don't know what to do. They're like, well, let's just do what he says and twist it, and magic, it worked. And they just the instructions on how to make a smoothie, I guess. And
yeah.
You think of people like that, and there's a lot of them out there that, like I said, you could be overworked, you could, whatever it is, you don't have the apparatus to really get into the details of things, and they find out that, okay, wait a minute, this pharmaceutical company was selling this weight loss formula that gives you, makes your heart valves turn inside out and kill you. All they know is that, okay, well, doctors and drug companies and corporations and scientists lie. And the next thing you know, nobody wants to get their children vaccinated. I think it's a pretty straightforward connection there.
Yeah, I do too. I do too.
And
and as you say, you can't. In many ways, you can't blame them.
No, you can't, because how are they supposed to know any better?
Sure.
I mean, I don't even know any better. I'm not a scientist when it comes down to that. I mean, I don't mean this like in a Marco Rubio, like I'm not a scientist man kind of way, but I mean seriously. You know, at some point you have to be able to judge who the property authorities are, who you can pay attention to, and who you can believe and who you can trust. It is a matter of trust.
Right.
And when someone has lost that trust, deserved or not deserved, it's gone.
Yeah.
And I think that's on the one hand, that's a large part of what we're looking at now, is people just do not trust any authorities, period, whatsoever. And this is one of the reasons why government is so unpopular. Libertarianism is, and snake flags and don't tread on me and all that stuff is kind of on the rise, because we're looking at people are just, they know they've been lied to, they just don't know who to blame for it.
Right.
And at the same time, and the Republicans have been able to capitalize on this to great gain. This is like, this is what makes Mitch McConnell's obstruction policy so successful.
Yes.
I mean, it's perfectly transparent to all of us who actually have time to look and think and reflect on and understand how the functions of government kind of operate.
Yes.
But to the average person who really has no clue about that, all they see is that government's not working, so it must be bad. So maybe we ought to get rid of it. Yeah.
and then you just develop a mindset or a rationalization for doing that. Once you're on that, once you're thinking in that frame of reference, in that particular frame of reference, you can just build your case, and suddenly you end up in a place that you never would have been 2 years ago. Well,
when you add to the mix of that, you look at people who see that dynamic and are completely unscrupulous and are, have no compulsions or qualms about exploiting it for their own political or financial ends, which that would be the other aspect. What I told you, there's the top down and the bottom up. This would be the top down approach. There's the people who can see, the confusion. Mm-hmm. They see a situation that's ripe for exploitation, and they are pushing it.
Right.
And they're pushing it for all it's worth, and they don't, if they have consciences, it's not on display here.
Yes, I see what you're saying, and I think you're right. I mean, it's a question of where they come together. But you're right. There are two ways of looking at that, and I think they meet at some point, but I guess the question is where. I know I'm close friends with a couple of people that I refer to all the time as cynics, because their assumption is everybody has an agenda, and you don't believe anybody. Everybody is suspicious, and then there is the other side, which is until I'm burned, I'm gonna believe people until they give me reason not to.
Sure.
And so the question is, are you going to be hurt? Are you going to be hurt more by not having faith in anybody, or are you going to be hurt most by having faith in everybody?
Right. Well, and I think and the cynicism, I think, is political cynicism is one of the biggest threats that we face, right now, because it is so easy to fall into. It is really the reflex of someone who either has been embarrassed horribly a couple of times and is just unwilling to place trust in anybody ever again, or they've witnessed it happen to someone else and it's like, oh no, that's never happened to me.
Yeah.
And then there's a possible third category where some people just assume that a cynic is smarter, too smart to fall for all that nonsense, So,
do you think that I've thought, and I guess you raised the issue, so I'll mention it. I've been thinking about what the overall meaning is of the fact that there are, at this point, a year and a half before the next election, there are already 14 announced candidates in one party, and we're not done yet. And you have to, if you think about that logically, you have to say this is a joke. I mean, they must know that the question is which ones are legitimate and which ones aren't. And the implication is what is in their mind. What are they thinking about? I made a comment at the opening of today's program that it seems to me that there are real benefits to being a candidate, even if you know you can't win. It makes the next time around much more legitimate, much more credible, for one thing. And it creates visibility if your need is for visibility. But on the other hand, I'm wondering if it says something about the electorate and about the attitude of these candidates towards the electorate. The people are out there not knowing what the hell to believe, so my chances of persuading them are as good as anybody else's. And that's scary.
Well, I don't think that's the dynamic there. When it comes to the primaries, my take anyway, obviously, since you asked.
No, that's fine. I did.
But just to say, like, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, because I don't know about that. But my sense of it is that this is really just a way for people to raise their own personal profile. And it works better. If I could come down to one reason why this works is because Fox News, basically. And that's why you see so many more contenders on the Republican side than you do on the Democratic side, because there's really there's no such thing as losing a presidential primary anymore if you're in the GOP, because it just, all it does is, you're going to, look at our last batch, look at 2012, everybody came out of that with extra money in their pocket and a book that they were able to sell, and a couple of them got like TV shows on Fox. Right. That's what I'm saying. Like, you don't see this dynamic on the Democratic side so much.
No,
And
many of those people are.
Off the top of my head, the only media figure I can remember being created by a Democratic primary is Al Sharpton. And aside from that, that's it. And that was back in 2008, 2007.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so that's a one-off, and before that, I don't think it ever happened before. But like on the GOP side, because of the existence of Fox News and maybe even the Learning Channel, I guess, in the case of Sarah Palin, you know, you can just get your feet out there, and you can say the most ridiculous things to appeal to the base of the base.
It didn't hurt any of them.
No,
I mean,
it's
none of them were hurt.
I mean, Sarah has been just now apparently lost her, her TV gig at Fox or whoever it was that was employing her, and she's been writing that since. How long has it been?
I know.
What year is this? 2015. It's been at least 7 years.
Yeah.
And that's $1 million. What's the downside in that?
That could be John McCain's contribution to a legacy. Is her. God Almighty.
That is, I think, that's like it or not, for him, that's definitely, I think, his most significant contribution to the culture.
Yeah. Oh man. Hey,
and,
listen.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and in a peripheral way, probably the entire Tea Party movement comes straight from her nomination as vice president. Because if you remember, like in the first couple of rallies after she was announced, that's when you start seeing the video of the really weird ones. The huge, used to be too, sensibly embarrassed to be too racist in public. Folks started, the trolls came out and started hanging around and their phones and cameras and all kinds of vile stuff. And those were Palin supporters. They weren't McCain supporters.
Years ago, we used to laugh at these folks, and nobody's laughing now. I mean, it's legit. It's somehow become semi-legitimate. The assumption is these people are extreme, but hey, they're out there, and there are people that think that way. Let them have their candidate, their spokesman.
Do you know, the first time I heard of Rush Limbaugh was back in the 80s when I was in high school, and my history my history teacher, he did actually have a couple of postgraduate degrees, but my teacher, he used to love to listen to Limbaugh on the drive home from school. Mm-hmm. Because he thought it was hysterical. And he would tell us, Brother Rush told us the other day, and he would tell this story, and we all think, that's crazy. And by the time I graduated, high school and got to university, by that time, he was actually becoming a serious thing. But like for years, we thought, oh, wow, my gosh.
Well, do you remember, I remember when I was in graduate school, and I'm drawing a blank on the name, but the deceased senator from North Carolina, he used to be the extreme conservative that the country used to laugh at. Not Strom Thurmond, that's South Carolina. But it was North Carolina, and I can't remember the fellow's name. I can see him, but anyway, I can remember when I was in graduate school, everybody laughed at him, and it seemed like, there came a time when he wasn't funny anymore. He was spokesman for a whole point of view that had established some sense of legitimacy in this country. And
if you look at the current Republican Party, the whole thing is kind of metastasized into a situation very much like that.
Yes,
like all the things we would have thought unthinkable, to the point of just being just ridiculous. And not even that long ago, not even 10 years ago.
No.
Prior to the election of George W. Bush, I don't think any of this would have been imaginable.
No.
The kind of candidates we're getting now.
No. Well, I never thought George W. Bush would be imaginable, to be honest with you. I still can't believe that he was elected twice. I just can't. I still can't believe it.
I still don't believe it.
Okay.
But we had to go to that corner. But
okay. All right. Hey, we got about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that you get the opportunity to make any particular point or other point that you wanted to make before we run out of time.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I didn't come in with a particular axe to grind.
Oh, good. Okay, good.
I just I like I said, because
I love this. I could rap like this for hours.
I got more to say than I can get say, and anytime I actually try to come in with something specific, I generally lose it.
Yeah.
I don't get much sleep these days. I'm not very good at keeping hold of a train of thought for very long. So
I got you. Well, you mentioned the issue of labor unions earlier, and I've been in my own mind. I'm going back to that because one of the things that has occurred to me is that what the Pope's encyclical seems to demonstrate as well is that we found a way to lose access to a lot of these perspectives and considerations that the Pope is arguing are vital to not only to the environment but to preserving the earth and saving the planet and all these other things. And we found a way to lose them. And I keep thinking more and more, are these the kinds of functions that, we basically say philosophically because of our commitment to freedom and opposition to socialism and stuff, that you can't, corporations can't, private sector can't do it. The public sector shouldn't do it because it begins to move us more and more towards socialism. And yet at the same time, we're becoming more and more focused on the idea that somebody better do it because we need to recover some of these things. And as I keep going through that scenario in my mind, I keep coming back to unions again. I'm saying, maybe they are. Maybe they are the missing element, the force that can come forward and begin to articulate and champion many of these things that we've lost. And I don't know. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, and that's what I've been thinking of as we've been going through the Pope's encyclical is, that maybe the voice of working people is what we need to hear.
Yeah. Well, that's a sticky thing. I would like, number one, I need to read the encyclical myself, and probably the full 180 pages, not just like you said, you spent, probably a couple of days condensing it down to 24, 25 pages, something like that.
Yeah. But that's what everybody else.
If you got notes, I'd love to see them. But,
that's what everybody else does too.
Sure.
And I mean, these are the things that I've highlighted, and at the same time, I keep reading what other people have highlighted, and over time, if you read enough about it, you begin to be able to piece together what's in it. But there's nothing that supplants actually going through the thing and reading it for yourself, because there's more in there than anybody who reads it can possibly extract from it, I think.
Sure. Well, and I guess that's a well-written encyclical, isn't it?
That's the best sources.
That kind of quality.
The best sources have that kind of quality where you can keep going back to it and you can learn every time.
Right.
You learn something different, you emphasize, I forgot that was in there. That's right,
And what kind of quality of mind must it take to create something like that? I mean,
oh my God. And when I think of especially Rick Santorum saying basically the Pope needs to stick to religion and leave science to the scientists. If you read this thing, you know that it's written by somebody who has some insight into science. I mean, I couldn't write it. I mean, even if I agree with much of it, but I couldn't write it because I couldn't articulate some of the scientific principles that he lays out, and not only explains, but criticizes in some cases, or elaborates on, or whatever.
Just to jump in real quick, guys, for pity's sakes, he is a scientist.
I know.
Right, yeah.
He is
how many degrees do you need at the postgraduate level before you're considered an actual, functional scientist? And on top of that, though, apparently he's also got a pretty good grasp of economics, it sounds like.
Yeah, it does.
For instance.
What this boils down to, and I mean, this to me at least, this matters. He's just not some guy who went to seminary. He is a Jesuit. And the Jesuits, Dr. Bill, you probably know better than either Horst or I, the Jesuits get real serious about quality of education.
Mm-hmm.
They are an inquiring lot. They're not like the Franciscans who just want to be, friends of birds and bugs and beetles and butterflies and, quivering humanity. They want to know how stuff works.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are a Jesuit trained scientist, odds are you've probably had a pretty rigorous education in whatever discipline you're in.
Right.
And I think, and I think probably more than anything he will ever publish, this encyclical speaks to the rigor of the training that this pontiff has had in his chosen field. And isn't it chemistry?
Yeah, it is chemistry.
Yeah, I think so. Or maybe even microchemistry, something like that. I'm not really sure. Or biology.
No, it's a technical. It's a chemistry degree
I
from
forgot
a
the
technical school. Yeah.
It's not general chemistry. It's something that's a little bit more specific.
But I think he had that, and he's had laboratory experience, and then he went to seminary. And I mean, I'm guessing that this wasn't part. You're right, Bob. I don't think this is part. This is part of his training before he became a priest. And I mean, it's obvious when you read it that you're reading somebody. You're reading text by somebody who knows what they're talking about, and it makes Rick Santorum look foolish, to be honest with you. But
that's but that doesn't require much effort, Doctor.
No, I was going to say I've seen that in Rick Santorum before, but at the same time, I mean, to just speak before you even think about what you're saying is a little bit frightening, and that.
I mean, for instance, I think Rick Santorum was the only presidential candidate of 2012 that wasn't able to get out of there with a stack of money.
Yeah.
Or a bestseller book.
And that either speaks to the fact that
Santorum got nothing.
that either speaks to the fact that he's not very sharp, or he's got something going for him that the others don't have. He's got there's only so far he'll go. I mean, But on the other hand, I think that he just didn't know how to benefit from where he was or whatever. But anyway, I got to tell you, I've thoroughly enjoyed this hour. I really have. What a treat! You made my week there, Horst. I'll tell you.
Well, I had to jump in before we go dark again for a week.
Yeah, we're going to go dark. We're going to go dark for a week. Bob's going to take a show on the road.
Yeah. Well, there's big doings up in D.C.
I'll tell you.
I think. Every little push helps at this stage. This is, they say a critical juncture, and
I know
on a lot of fronts. On a lot of fronts, boy, what a lot of movement we've seen in the last week or so. So
yes, I know. It's really been a very, very momentous week when you think about it. It really has, and I'm anxious to. The one thing I'm looking for, the one positive that I see in this time that we're going to have, because we're not doing live programming, is I'm really looking forward to getting into some of these dissents and some of these opinions and really work through them a little bit more than I have. I've been collecting snippets from here, there, and everywhere, but I really want to get in and just do the spade work that right. I think is so illuminating, and it's going to give me time to do it. So in that sense, I'm looking forward to it. But well, listen, we're almost at the end of the time. We got less than 2 minutes to go, and Horst, I want to thank you so much, and I'm so glad that your schedule is working up and you were able to come out for some air and get out of your cage. You're gonna be going back into it, but they're gonna leave the door open for you.
Something like that. Well,
yeah.
It was the funniest thing. I just thought, what am I doing this for? So I talked to the manager, and he says, like, I'm going to work less. And you're like, okay, great. I'm like, oh, wow. Boy, that was easy. Well, guys are different last 6 months. I have no idea.
Right.
So
Right. Hey, listen, you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the week and weekend.
Well, you too. I'll eject. I do want to send you some stuff via email, and I got the next couple of days off, so I'm going to get to right on that. I'll get that to you.
Great.
So,
I'll look forward to it.
I'll let you wrap up.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
Too.
Okay,
right.
You too, boys. Thank you so much. And we're at 58, right on the edge of 59 minutes after the hour now, so I guess our time together is done. Bob, I want to thank you for your contributions, and I want to encourage you to be safe next week, and I hope you come back with all sorts of victories and positive news, and I hope that everybody has a wonderful 4th of July weekend. Please make it a safe one. And we'll get together again. Remember, we'll be back together again live a week from this coming Monday. This is Bill O'Brien. You've been listening to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your contributions. Be safe. Enjoy the 4th.